With the election just around the corner, I've been reading up on US presidents. And one thing that just sort of like went off in the back of my head is like, look, everyone knows, if you know anything about US presidents, is that they are term limited. They cannot be elected to the office more than twice. But I genuinely started thinking, are there loopholes to that? And looking into it, yes, there certainly are. If you go back to the Revolutionary days, the first president, George Washington, was elected twice and served 2 terms, but he was a very, very reluctant figure, and it's part of why people wanted him to be president. He did not want the power of that office, but he took it anyway after much, much convincing from the other founding fathers and leaders of the Revolution. Washington, although he may have retired purely because he wanted to retire and wasn't so much about like a position of honor and giving up power, he did set that precedent, and people were fascinated by that, his ability to give up power, and that lasted in the American consciousness, and it was just an established norm that presidents would not run for a 3rd term. They would serve 2, and then with dignity and with grace, they would retire. Now, there were certainly exceptions and people who tried to run for a 3rd term, ignoring the norm that Washington had established. Woodrow Wilson tried to seek a 3rd term. Ulysses S. Grant went so far as to contest the Republican convention and come back for a 3rd term. And Teddy Roosevelt, probably the most famous on that list, even though he wasn't elected twice, he did run for a 3rd term with his own progressive Bull Moose Party, but ended up losing that election to Woodrow Wilson. But of course, when things got interesting, and you probably know this already, was when Franklin Delano Roosevelt came around, and he was elected to 4 terms of the presidency, elected originally in 1932, and then winning his last election in 1944. FDR would die quite early on in his 4th term, but he served 12 years as the president, more than anyone else in American history. After FDR died, there was a genuine fear among American politicians that this would become the new norm, that popular presidents would keep getting elected and then die in office, that there would be this new like pseudo monarchy almost, where presidents would end up serving for life with their popularity and only leave when they died. Now, you can think that sounds pretty ridiculous in hyper-partisan times, but it was a genuine fear that they had. So the United States passed the 22nd Amendment, which put a limit on how often someone could be elected to the office of president. The 22nd Amendment basically stipulates that an individual can only be elected to the office of president twice. And it has a secondary rule, which is that if you ascend to the office of presidency, not by being elected, like you're a vice president and the president dies or resigns, if you serve out a majority of that president's term, that counts as one. So take Gerald Ford, for example. He took over and served a majority of Nixon's 2nd term. He was eligible to be re-elected in 1976, but he would not be eligible in 1980 because he's already served more than a term and a half. So the first thing you'll notice there is that, yes, there is a way to serve as president for more than 8 years. If you were elected as vice president and then you take over for less than half a term, you can serve that out, get elected yourself, then get elected again for a total of roughly 10 years in office. Now, the only person that is applied to is Lyndon Johnson. He took over for the last year or so of Kennedy's term after he was assassinated, got re-elected in 1964, and was eligible to run again in 1968, but was extremely unpopular at the time and had health issues, so made the decision not to run. So, is that it? Is the most time you could serve as president 9 years, 364 days? Well, as you could probably guess from the title of this video, there is a strikingly large loophole in the 22nd Amendment. The 22nd Amendment specifically deals with who can be elected to the office of the presidency. It is a regulation regarding the electoral process. It does not say that a president cannot serve or hold office if he has been president for 2 terms or elected to the office twice. It is specifically about who can be elected president. And you can become president without being elected. Now, look, some people are going to bring up the 12th Amendment and how that says that the requirements to be vice president are exactly the same as the requirements to be president. Yes, but that is referring specifically to eligibility to hold the office, not eligibility to be elected to the office. And that sounds like splitting hairs because it is, but trust me, that does matter when we're talking about the specifics of constitutional law. So the somewhat sketchy pathway is there. If you serve 2 terms as president, the simple answer is to then get nominated as vice president on your party's next presidential ticket. And then when you get elected, which is incredibly unlikely, winning 3 terms in a row is next to impossible, but if that happens, you then tell your president to resign, and you will then go from vice president to president without having been elected. Now, that is sketchy. That is very, very sketchy, and it is not in the spirit of the law. But there is a big difference between the spirit and the letter of the law. Now, vice presidents are explicitly not term limited. Someone can serve as vice president as many times as they want. So all you really need to do is get on your party's nomination as the vice president for every subsequent election, and then just have the president resign. Now, that sounds impossible. It's hard to tell someone to give up the most powerful office in the land, but if you had a loyal lackey who was like devoted enough, you could probably pull that off. Now, a lot of people will look at this and they'll say, look, this is ridiculous. This is not possible. There's no way that any politician would go for this, and there's no way that people would put up with it. And I just have to ask you, like, are you sure? Because politicians are power hungry. They always have been. And if you are sketchy about it, think about it from like the perspective of, if you could have a third term of Obama if you're a Democrat, would you want it? If you are a Republican and you could have a third term of Trump, assuming he wins this time, would you want it? In an environment as politicized as this, people are probably willing to try just about anything. Okay, but let me be clear. I don't think anyone's going to try this anytime soon. I'm just saying that they could. And when there is a loophole that big in the United States Constitution, unless somebody takes it and clarifies that the 22nd Amendment is about serving as president, not just the electoral process, someone at some point is going to take advantage of it. Because FDR did. He took advantage of precedent that existed to get 4 terms, and it took that for them to finally go ahead and fix the United States Constitution to make it clear that that cultural norm was established law. And I get the sense that as long as that loophole is there about becoming president for a 3rd term, someone in the back of their head, some politician is going to think, maybe it's time somebody tried that.